Now, I wish I had better news this time to ring. Usually, when I'm doing a Substack, hi Paul, nice to see you. Usually, when I'm doing a Substack live, I'm usually talking about hi Megan, good to see you. I'm usually talking about American politics, but in this particular case, I will talk about American politics as well. But I'm obviously going to start with the big news at the moment, the unfortunate news at the moment, which happened in Sydney, Australia, and that was the terrorist attack. Um, and obviously, it was a horrific thing. In Australia, we don't often have mass shootings. Um, so, just so people know, this is the worst mass shooting in 30 years. Thanks, Kimmy. Thank you for that. Yeah. Good morning, Joe. Very sad day for Australia. Please note that Aussies are not like this. Exactly, Mary. And it's interesting thing about this, Mary, because obviously Mary's also from Australia. She's from Melbourne. Is that often I come on here and I will say, don't blame, don't blame all of America of the US for electing Donald Trump. So, and in this case, thank you, Lisa. In this case, I will say, don't blame all of Australians for what these two insane people did, which happened to be a father and son. So these were actually, yeah. So it's nice though that an Arab man was a hero to the incident. Yeah, yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. An Arab man. A lot of people saw the video. Mentally ill men with guns. Exactly. People saw that video where a man grabbed the gun. That person was also an Arab, and it was good to see that he put his own life at risk. He was later shot. I believe he's going to recover. I believe his injuries aren't like life threatening, but they were serious. He was shot. I think he was shot in the arm, and that those type of places that wasn't life threatening, but. Um, for people who don't know Australia very well, Bondi Beach is probably the most iconic beach in Australia. It's the most well-known beach. It's very touristy. I live in Brisbane, but I'm actually originally from Sydney, so I spent only been in Brisbane for about 10 years. So my whole life was spent in Sydney, and I lived in Bondi Beach for about. Hi, Natasha, thanks for coming. Um, I lived in Bondi Beach in the early 2000s from about 2002 to 2004 on Bondi Beach, like two streets back from where the shooting happened. And Bondi Beach has always been very touristy because it's a very famous beach. It's in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. And the interesting thing about that area of Sydney, the eastern suburbs, not just Bondi Beach, but also the other suburbs that are near there, it has a large Jewish community. In fact, one of the largest Jewish communities in Australia. And generally in Australia, we don't have a massive Jewish community, not like, say, New York. So, it's a very different culture here, but that particular area does have a large Jewish constituents. And obviously, that was celebrating the start of Hanukkah. So, and obviously, these two people were targeting these people in Bondi because obviously of the Jewish thing. I saw a video of one because they were on this, like, it's a pedestrian bridge, and it was so weird seeing that pedestrian bridge because I used to cross that pedestrian bridge to get to the beach so my home was two streets back, and so you had to cross the bridge. It was easy to go over the bridge to get to the pavilion, which is the main part of the beach, and then go down there. And they basically, the two shooters, the father and son, set themselves up on that pedestrian bridge, and they were only shooting towards where the festival was, the Jewish festival. And there was actually videos of people filming them on their phones from the opposite side of on the other side. So the back, so where the shooter's back, and the actual shooters looked at the people looking. So they weren't people. They didn't look like they were people at the festival, and they told them to go away. They said, "Go away, go away." So they weren't interested in shooting just normal, like just average people walking past. They were only interested in shooting people who were part of the Jewish community. So this was again, this was 100% an anti-Semitic attack on the Jewish community, and there's no way to go around that. It's 100%. And within a couple of hours, the Australian Prime Minister basically said this was an anti-Semitic attack. It was a terrorist attack. And for me, when I was hearing about this, is how can someone in Australia, right, shoot that many people? Because I think it's 16 people dead with about 40 people injured. And it's such a horrific thing because we're not used to mass shootings in Australia. We're not used to it. Whenever I hear, like the other day, there was a shooting at Brown University. Before then, there was another shooting somewhere else in America. So whenever, as someone who follows American politics, to then see a mass shooting in my own country was quite a shock because we're just not used to it. And the fact that it was such a blatant anti-Semitic attack that there was no, it wasn't like, was it not? It was 100% an anti-Semitic attack. Even made it to some degree worse. So to find out that there were so many deaths, because the last mass shooting we had in Australia was in 1996. And after, it was a guy called Martin Bryant, who had very severe mental illness in Tasmania, which is like an island, Haipalo, an island off Australia. And he was like about 27, 28, and he just started shooting people. Now, our gun laws back then were much, much milder. It was much easier to get a gun back then. And it was actually the Conservative government under John Howard who brought in really strong, strict gun laws and changed it. And as I said, it was actually a Conservative government, not a left-wing government that did that. And that absolutely brought down mass shootings by a gigantic degree, right? The fact that it's taken 30 years for another mass shooting to happen, shows that to some degree it was still effective, right? The other, he was insane, but we managed to tighten our gun laws. Yeah, that's right, Waring, we did. And the thing about this guy, the father and son who did this, right? So obviously there's no evidence at the moment. There's obviously evidence that this was some sort of either something to do with Palestine, or it was like an Islamic State thing. It was obviously like a radical Islamic thing that was going through, just based on who we know who they were, all that sort of stuff. So that's actually true. It was an Islamic terrorist type thing, but there's no evidence that they were directed to do this from outside. So they weren't, there's no evidence that ISIS contacted them. They were, in a sense, they were radicalized online, probably by themselves, right? So the father, this is the weird thing, the father had a gun. Like he had, they must have been radicalized online. Yeah, exactly. Hi, Sandra. Good to see you again, Sandra. Thanks for joining. Yeah. And look, if you're part of, you don't have to be, you can be radicalized online without actually having someone tell you what to do. You can fall down the rabbit hole of, anti-Semitism without someone saying to you, hi, you need to be an anti-Semitic, you need to go do this. You can radicalize yourself by watching content online. So far, we don't have any evidence that there was anybody else involved in this. It's probably got something to do with Palestine. In my opinion, it will probably have something to do with Palestine, and that they were, but I would probably say that they were already radicalized. Now, the son was like 24 years old, so I can't say much about the son, but the dad was 50 years old. The fact that this was like a father and something is even sort of, to me, even a little bit more gross. That sort of makes me think that the dad, in a sense, radicalized the son to do this. But the dad had legal guns, right? The rifles that the dad had, they weren't semi-automatic guns like the ones you have in America, like the machine guns. They were hunting rifles, right? So they were, so that you had to manually so if you watch the videos, you watch him manually set up the next shot, right? So bang, bang, bang. He has to do it manually, right? So had it been a semi-automatic, it would have been a lot more people killed. Now, the thing about those type of rifle guns is the scope. They're very, very accurate at shooting people from long distances. And I watched a couple of videos, and so again, these people, the father had he didn't. These were not illegal guns; they were legal guns because even though Australia has very, very tight, like legal controls on guns, they're not impossible to get. You, there's a couple of reasons why you can have guns in Australia. Although we have really strict background checks, most people in Australia don't carry guns. And in America, you can get a gun for protection. In Australia, you can't. You can't go into a gun shop. And by the way, there's almost no gun shops here. The gun shop thing here, I've never. I'm sure they're around, but the gun shops here are for people who live on farms, so they use the guns to like kill animals on farms or whatever it is that they use them on farms for. Or they is there an NRA con? No, there's not. There's no Kimmy. No, there's not. No. There is a group, there is a political group called One Nation, which is like a right wing political group, but there is not a no one I know carries guns. Yeah, so you got to understand. Like, no, I've lived all over Australia, and I've never seen a gun. I don't know anybody who's owned a gun, and I've never seen a gun outside of a farm. One time I was on a farm, and but that's different. They're using the guns for to live on a farm to use for their property. The other reason that people would use guns is if you are a member of a gun club, which is again a very rare thing. I've never known anybody who was a member of a gun club, right? And so, but these people were the father and son were members of a gun club, and the dad was using the reason he got his guns legally. Worse than MAGA, but no real strong gun lobby here. That's right. Yeah, and the reason that they were able to get the dad was able to get the gun is because he said that he was using the gun for hunting. So there are you can get guns for hunting in Australia, but again, they're not semi-automatic guns. They're like rifles, like the ones that they used. They were legal. Those guns that were used were legal guns in Australia. But again, most people don't have we don't have a gun culture in Australia. So for someone to be into like hunting or into guns is a very rare thing here, right? So it's not, we don't have open carry. You can't go into a gun shop and say, I want a gun for protection. That's not legal. You're not allowed to have guns for protection. So you're not allowed to say, I'm worried someone's going to break into my home. That's not a reason to have a gun. And you have to be for things like, I live on a farm and I need the rifles for shooting animals or whatever, or I hunt animals. They're the only reasons mostly you can have guns in Australia for. So it's a very different culture that we have here in terms of guns. So I was watching a few people online commenting saying that the young guy and the dad was so good with guns that they must have been ex-military. Well, a lot of people got interviewed in Australia, and actually it wouldn't take that. The way they were shooting was not that unusual for people who are members of a gun club. Like to shoot like that, it's not that unusual apparently. So again, they don't have to have military training to do that. Now, I was quite surprised that, in my opinion, that the dad had such access to a gun. Now, you also have to understand is, as far as we know now, neither the dad was definitely not in the sights of any organization. Like, for example, we have ASIO here, and ASIO is like an intelligence organization that looks at things like terrorism, the federal police, and things like that. And there was no information that hi Joe, it's always good to see you. I'm so sorry for what happened, and that we're once again having to talk about something so heartbreaking. Yeah, thank you, Natasha. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. Do you have much of a military? There's three guys. We have three people who are in the military. No, I'm joking. We don't have much of a military to be honest. We do have a military. We do have like a proper military. I don't know how many people are in there, but we do have a military here. but it's not huge. You know what I mean? In fact, when America went into Afghanistan, we also went into Afghanistan with you to help you. So Australia, like the CIA, the suspects were known to the police, unfortunately. Yeah. Now, Mary, I don't think they were known for terrorism, like for high end, like the dad wasn't known for terrorism from what I was reading today. I think the son might have had some low level thing, but neither one of them were on the antenna. Three guys military, yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, three guys and a bow, pretty much, yeah. But no, we do have a military, but obviously, when you have a population of 27 million, the military is not going to be massive, but we do have a military. Um, and so, again, I think one of the things that really got to me today is being online and seeing people like Laura Loomer, who are, the Rasputin of the MAGA world, and so many right wing people online say that, oh, well, because Australia's always been used as an example of why you shouldn't have guns, like so many guns in your country. Australia was always used as that. So when someone would argue that the point of, oh, well, if you get rid of your guns, you're going to have less gun deaths. Well, look at Australia. They did that in 1996 and it worked. And now you're having all these people in America go, see, it didn't work. Like, that is like the most ridiculous argument in the world. It was 30 years when you have a gap of 30 years, which is like a generation between one mass shooting and another mass shooting, yes, that's still working because in America, you have mass shootings on a weekly basis. And if you actually take the population, 27 million versus 340 million, and so you take out the population in terms of, per guns, Australia is way less gun deaths. Laura Loomer is not allowed to have a gun because of her history of mental illness. It makes her furious. Yeah, exactly. Brett Stevens from New York Times is the worst and blame Australia for the attack. Yeah, exactly. Look, I agree. Look, there's two things that have really been annoying me about the reaction to this. Like, one is the idea, like, of course, Australia is not perfect. Of course, we have gun deaths here. Of course, um, what happened in Australia was awful, awful thing. And there's no doubt about it. It was anti-Semitic. So anybody who thinks it wasn't anti-Semitic, on either side of politics, this was 100% anti-Semitic. Now, again, you can't blame, like in America, right? You will have like this is the thing that really does my head in at the moment, and it's the same with what's happened in Australia with this particular one. Is you will take a few people, right? A few people, one or two people who do something. Like in America, you had Charlie Kirk was killed, and then all of the left was blamed for Charlie Kirk's death. All of the left was blamed for Charlie. It's like anybody who didn't support MAGA or Trump was complicit in the murder, right? So that is just like so insane. Australia is still a safer place to live than the US. Yeah, that's exactly right, Kimmy. You can't take a one-off terrorist attack, no matter how awful it is, and it is awful. And I'm sure that if you are in the eastern suburbs of Sydney and you're talking to the Jewish community right now, they would probably be telling you they've never felt more unsafe. And if I was part of the Jewish community in Sydney, I would feel the same way because it was an anti-Semitic attack. And if I was a Jewish person, I would 100% be way more concerned if I was in Sydney right now than anything. We do feel safe here and no Trump. Yeah, exactly. But when you take it, and that's always so. But when you take Australia as a whole, it's still a much safer country than it is there. And again, it's important to remember that these people were radicalized online, and there's no way. So, what I've been hearing in Australia is, well, Australia didn't do enough about anti-Semitism. They weren't strong enough. You have, as Mary said, you have people like Brett Stevens in the New York Times saying that you got Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel saying that Australia weren't strong enough in this. Now, I don't understand. Like, as awful as this was, I don't know. They interviewed someone on TV today who said all those things, and they blamed our government, our centre left government. They said they didn't do enough. It's their fault, whatever. And then the reporter asked that person, "What would you have done differently?" And they avoided that question, because what could you have done to avoid two people? And by the way, the father and son were living together. It wasn't like one was living here and they were text messaging each other and they were on the internet talking to ISIS. If two people, a father and son who are living in the same home, are having conversations and they're not telling anyone else about it, they're not on the internet going, "Hey, we're about to do this. Hey, we're about to do that." How is the law enforcement supposed to know that that's going to happen? Unfortunately, when you have lone wolf attackers, people who are not in a, they're not in a group, right? They're not part of ISIS. They might be sympathetic to ISIS. They might be sympathetic to Islamic terrorism, but they're not in communications with those people. They have they have self radicalized themselves. I don't know what you can do to stop those people. Like, saying to the government saying anti-Semitism is bad is not going to stop two people who are anti-Semitic from murdering people. That's insane. That's not going to happen. Australia has just so you know, we had there was a Mary would know this. We had a rally in Melbourne, and there was an part of that rally, very small group of Nazis, like full on Nazis. There was like 5 or 10 of them, right? Nazis in Melbourne, right? And one of those Nazis, and by the way, they weren't hiding their faces. One of those Nazis was from South Africa. South Africa, right? The nation that Trump wants to bring more people from. A white South African was part of this Nazi group. Now, he wasn't an Australian citizen, he was a visa holder. So Australia kicked him out of Australia and sent him back to South Africa. And all the people on the right were like, "Well, what about free speech?" So the idea that um, the idea that the government wasn't pushing back against anti-Semitism is just not true at all. Our prime minister was constantly talking about how anti-Semitism is horrible. He did a lot of stuff. This is just complete nonsense that they didn't do it. But at the end of the day, when you have international things that are happening, you have Palestine, you have Israel. These are not, Australia does not control those things. These things, way to Australia, yeah, these things will radicalize people who are probably already been radicalized, and they will use whatever, through religion, through through fundamentalism, religion and stuff like that. And they will use these things as an excuse, right? They'll use Palestine as an excuse to go and do murderous anti-Semitic things. There is not much the Australian government can do about people who are not known as terrorists, right? Who don't have a history of being terrorists, um, and who are radicalized at home and are not in part of an organization. Somewhat big, and again, I haven't heard one person give a policy that would have made this not happen. You can't say you're not strong enough against anti-Semitism, and then when someone says to you, "Okay, what would you have done differently?" and then they stare at the camera, "Well, I don't know." Of course, they don't know. You can't. If I'm sitting at home, right? If you're sitting at home, I'm sitting at home. Someone is sitting at home, and they're radicalizing themselves, and they don't tell anybody about it. How is how unless we work out some way to read people's minds, if they're not sending texts about it, if they're not on the internet about it, there's no way for anyone to know about this. So again, what do we do in that situation, right? There's not much you can do. It's self-radicalized terrorism is the hardest thing to overcome, because there's no way to. It's almost impossible to trace, especially when the people don't have a criminal record. In America, for example, and a lot of times it's so ridiculous. We are being blamed as Aussies as being anti-Semitic. Exactly, Mary. Yeah, to blame a whole country for this happening is just is as bad as blaming all of America for Charlie Kirk being killed, right? It's and again, here's the other thing that I always think about when I think of ISIS or when I think of Islamic terrorism and things like that. People on the right will always say, "Oh, the left has done it again." Like, if you look at the charter of Hamas, if you look at the charter of Islamic State, they're not exactly the most woke people on the planet. In fact, they're very, very far from woke. They don't like gay people. They don't like trans people. They don't like gay marriage. They're some of the most conservative people on the planet, and they get called super left. It's just one of the most ridiculous things. I would argue, and I'm not saying that Islamic State is MAGA, but in terms of culturally and a lot of ways, they have a lot more in common. They're both conservative. And some parts of MAGA, they're extremely religious. Like, they want to create an ethno-Christian state. They want. Are you worried that it will become a trend now in Australia, Kimmy? Yeah, no. My worry is copycat killings. That is a worry. Now, believe it or not, years ago, there was a terrorist attack that happened in Australia a long time ago in a place called the Link Cafe, and it was a cafe again in Sydney, in the city, and where an Australian who had radicalised himself through ISIS. Again, there was no connection between. This was years ago when ISIS was a big thing. And he took a whole bunch of people hostage in a cafe, and many people died, including himself. Not to this level. Not as many people died in that as this. So it has happened before to a lesser level. And again, it was sort of ISIS inspired type people, and it was in a cafe. But at that time, I do feel like I had this thing that the more you talk about something, the more like, so when ISIS had this really big profile, I feel like there were young men who were attracted to it because it had a big. I think, Kimmy, that the government and police are really going to go after more strict gun laws. Yeah. I mean, even then, Mary, it's going to be hard because I have heard an argument against more strict gun laws, and that is, if you make the gun laws even more stricter, what can sometimes happen is it can build up a more underground system. Do you know what I mean? For people who want to have legal guns. So I'm not 100% sure on whether we should go more strict or not, because again, you have to remember this is a 1 in 30 year. This is a 1 in 30 year event, and you as a free country, Australia's a free country, America's a free country, most of Europe's a free country. When you live in a free country, there is always going to be some, you know what I mean, that you can't, or another gun amnesty where people are handing guns. Yeah, there's always going to be some risk of things happening. You know what I mean? There's always going to be risk of murder, of terrorist attacks, and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. So I think from that point of view, I think I don't know if more gun laws is the way to go or not, because it's already very, very strict in Australia to get guns, very, very, very strict. But again, I will say my only concern is copycat killings, and the type of people I'm talking about is young men, right? So this is what could happen, because what happened after 9/11 is more people were radicalized after 9/11 because Muslim communities felt they were being targeted, and that radicalized young men. Now, again, I'm not making excuses for them, but I'm just saying, like, after 9/11, all around the world, young men of Muslim faith were more radicalized, and they were able to be taken advantage of by certain people with more power by saying, "See, America hates you. America thinks you're all terrorists. America thinks you're all this. I'm worried that if the Muslim community is um, is treated like they're all terrorists, um, and all of the people, it's pure hate. But why do these people get these guns? Yeah, and if all the Muslim communities treated like terrorists, and especially young men and stuff like that, I don't know if then you get yourself a um, young man, 18 years old. He doesn't have many friends. He has a mental illness, right? He's already been radicalized. And then something like he sees this on TV, and there are some people with mental illness who will look at this and think, oh, wow, that was cool. That was great, whatever. And people did that with ISIS. Young men from all around Western countries, like Muslim, they went there and they fought with ISIS, right? So I do worry that when something gets a lot of media attention, which of course it would, it can radicalize mentally ill other people with copycat killings. I'm hoping that doesn't happen. Again, it would be harder to happen in Australia because if you have an 18-year-old radicalized, mentally ill man, it's very hard for that person to get a gun, right? It's not easy for that person to get a gun. Again, the guns that the father and son had, the dad had the gun. The dad had those. He's 50 years old, so it's not like the dad isn't like 20 years old. So the dad had guns for years and years and years, and he hadn't done anything wrong. So who knows if the dad got radicalized in the last 10 years or was radicalized even further, whatever happened. But yeah, so even though copycat killings does worry me, I feel because we still do have strong gun laws, they're less likely to happen. You're more likely to probably get a stabbing in Australia because guns are so much harder to get that if I wouldn't be surprised if I heard of a stabbing because it's much easier in Australia. If you're an 18-year-old, it's almost impossible to get a gun, but you can get a big knife and you can cause a lot of damage with a knife as well, right? So from that point of view, but yeah, I mean, but a lot of the stuff from America that's really been annoying me as well. That's been really annoying me as well is this idea that somehow Australia, what I was saying before is that somehow no, I can't believe this happened there. I'm so sorry. We get it here, but it's so crazy. Are there many stabbings? Not a lot. No, not at all, Kimmy. They're rare. Stabbings are rare. Yeah, very rare. Yeah. Australia has one of the lowest crime rates in the world. I think Japan has lower crime than us, but Australia's one of the lowest crime rates in the world. Even lower than places like Finland, Sweden, Denmark. We have a very, very low. We still have to address mental illness that affects young men all over the world. Yeah. Uh, this is one of the things that people in America who are probably like libertarian type people who are pro gun, they will often say things like, oh, well, the problem in America with guns is not the guns, it's mental illness. Well, Australia has a problem with mental illness as well. Europe has a problem with mental illness as well. So does the UK. But the gun rates in America are much higher. So, I, you know, I just hope that there are people smart enough in America to know that a one-off event that hadn't happened in 30 years, which was horrendous, is not a reason to think, well, it didn't work in Australia. Because it did work. It worked for 30 years, right? And so, again, you're way better off when you take in population per population, Australia's population, you mix it in with America's population. The chances of being shot by a gun in America is like way higher than Australia. Way, even with the recent killing yesterday, the mass murder that we saw yesterday. So don't fall for that. Don't fall for that rhetoric of, well, see, it didn't work in Australia. Well, that's like that's like saying when there's a 30-year gap, it's just insane. I Wes, it's just the thing is that think about this. if there's a mass shooting in America, it barely makes the news, right? If there was a mass shooting in Australia and it was front page news all around the world. So why is it front page news all around the world when it happens in Australia, but it's not front page news when it happens in America? That's because it's so uncommon to have mass shootings in Australia, and it's so ridiculously common to have it in America. And that just shows you in the terms of how the news is covered is the fact that if mass shootings were common in Australia, you barely would have heard about it. It would have been, another mass shooting in Australia. But the reason it was such a big news is because we hadn't had one for 30 years. And the reason it's weird, I was on Bondi Beach exactly 2 years ago. Oh, Richie, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know where you're from, Richard. We're American visiting, but yeah, Bondi's a very touristy beach. It's probably Australia's most famous beach for tourists. There's a lot of backpacker hostels in Bondi as well. So a lot of backpackers who come from Europe, England, America, Canada, they will stay in Bondi. They'll get jobs in pubs and bars as like mixing drinks. It's got a really good it's got a very good vibe for tourists, backpackers, that sort of thing. Very expensive because it's Bondi. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. Half the people here own a gun. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And look, you would have noticed, Richard, when you're in Australia, you probably never saw guns. Believe me, we rarely have any shootings in Australia. Exactly. Yeah, and it is maddening to watch um, people with massive audiences online try to turn this into an anti-Semitic thing that's unique to Australia, or that we have a gun, or that the gun, doesn't matter. Guns, barring guns doesn't matter. It does matter. It makes a big difference to have less guns. Yeah, yeah. I definitely felt safe in Australia. Yeah, thanks, Rich. And look, most people who come to America from overseas feel very safe. Yeah. Now, this is important to say. This was a terrorist attack. And not to, and a terrorist attack um, was again, it's not in America when you have mass shootings, it's like it's a mass shooting in a school or a primary or a small school or in a university, or it's someone who's angry at their boss or whatever. This is like a one-off, unique event in Australia, and so I wouldn't in any way, take this as something that, but, and again, with the anti Semitism thing, there is no more anti Semitism in Australia as there would be in America or Europe or the UK or anywhere else. It's not unique to Australia. I don't know any, I mean, first of all, the amount of Jewish people in Australia is a very small population compared to other countries. Secondly, I think anti-Semitism is all around the world. I think it's a real thing that's happening, and it is definitely something that's real, right? It's definitely a real thing, and I think it's definitely gotten worse. But most of the violence we're seeing from anti-Semitism is still coming from um, places like ISIS, radical Islamic groups, that sort of stuff, that sort of side of it. You know, so it's not necessarily, it's coming from places that have a connection, so you've got Palestine, Israel, Arab states, Israel, and it's not about Australians just hating Jewish people. It's not that at all. It's about people being radicalized in certain communities, like we saw after 9/11, like we saw all that sort of stuff. So this is kind of just a continuation of that. So again, there's not any more. So these people in America, like the New York Times and all that, Brett Stevens and anybody in America who's in the news, and I'm including liberals here as well in the news at New York Times, just if you're going to say is um, Australia was not sympathetic enough to Jewish people, and that's why this happened, give us an actual policy that would have stopped these two people from doing it. Don't say Australia is less sympathetic to Jewish people. Give me Give me a policy. Say, because I read the Brett Stevens article in the New York Times, and all it said was, so what happened is Australia, along with a lot of other countries, um, hello everyone, peace and matter. Hi, bathroom guy, good to see you again. Good to see you. Um, I read, so I was reading a lot online, and yeah, how many people died and how many were injured. I feel so bad for the families. They were celebrating Hanukkah, right? Yeah, it was Hanukkah. It was the start of Hanukkah. Hanukkah. Um, so far, so there are 40 people in hospital. The last time I checked, it was 16 people had died, including one 10-year-old. So there was a child who was killed as well. And but I don't know. It seems to be going up all the time because there are people in hospital in a critical condition. There were police officers who were also killed in this situation. So yeah, it is a bad event. Now, um, what happened? I'll tell you something else that happened in Australia not that long ago, and it's happened a couple of times. And it's that we have this group, and Mary will be able to. We have this group of, it's a very, very small group. Australia is a great place. It's sad that these bad people get away in many countries. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is the way I would look at what happened in Australia is you would look at, after you saw the terrorist attacks in Madrid. Do you remember that? I think it was 2005. There was terrorist attacks in Paris. It's been terrorist attacks all around the world. This is one of those terrorist attacks, right? That sounds wonderful, Joe, to live in a place like that. Yeah, it is. This is very unusual. Like, these people need to realize this is highly, highly unusual in this country. And again, ask yourself, why did this get so much news? And the reason why this got so much news around the world is because it's so rare. Again, the amount of mass shootings in America, they don't all get a lot of coverage because it's so common. So there's big differences. But in Australia, we have had a couple of incidences where we have these far right wing groups, and they're basically they call themselves like sovereign state. And they kind of got more powerful during COVID because in Australia we had quite strong lockdown laws during COVID, and so these people were like, the government shouldn't tell me what to do, don't tell us what to do, all this sort of stuff. And so they consider themselves sovereign citizens. So that means they don't have to listen to the government. So they're like sovereign from the government. So what the government tells them something like, oh, here's a speeding fine. These far right wing groups will go, no, well, I'm not part of your government. I'm a sovereign citizen, right? They're like conspiracy theory nutters. Just so you know, in Australia, we call conspiracy theorists cookers. Cookers, like as in your brain is cookers. And some of these groups have killed police officers, and they've killed like about 4 or 5 police officers. And this has happened over the last couple of years where they've actually deliberately killed police officers because they believe that police officers is part of the police state. These are far right wing groups. These are not Islamist groups. They are, they're just Aussie right wing groups, right? So again, there has been violence in Australia against police officers, for example, but they were from far right wing groups. This particular violence that we saw in this Jewish state is very rare because I don't remember, right? It's rare there. I can't believe it. Yeah. Like, there is, so obviously this what's happening at the moment, whenever there's an international thing, in America, so you have, and this idea that this is the other bit, like, I consider myself a supporter of Israel, right? I support a two-state solution, right? I support that Israel has a right to exist and Palestine has a right to exist, right? I think the October killings in Israel were horrendous. But as more time and time went past, I started to feel more and more sympathetic towards the people in Palestine because I thought, at what stage is this going to finish, right? So my views are sort of nuanced on Palestine and Israel, but I am a supporter of Israel as a state. So I would be considered a Zionist. But the idea that if Australian government criticizes Israel, because what happened is the Australian government criticized Israel, right? And criticized Benjamin Netanyahu, right? And because they did that, Australia was, called anti-Semitic or something, even though Australia, under our current government, was extremely, extremely supportive of the Jewish community. I mean, extremely supportive, right? So even a little bit of pushback, they were considered anti-Semitic, right? So the idea that you can't criticize Israel as a state, therefore you're complicit in a crazy anti-Semitic doing something, is really bad. Because then what you have is where you have Israel government, not the people, but the government being able to do whatever they want. And if you criticize that group, you're therefore anti-Semitic. And if some crazy people do some anti-Semitic stuff like these murderers did, then you're complicit in that. Now, I will say this. If you look at people like Brett Stevens or other people who are very pro-Israel, like I am pro-Israel as well, but I feel like you should be able to criticize Israel. I think you should be able to criticize Israel, right? So if someone like Brett Stevens, he will criticize, for example, the National Guard going into states, because he's not a big Trump supporter, right? He'll say, look, the National Guard shouldn't be going to California, New York, all those places, right? Now, some person shot at National Guard people on a bus, remember, a couple of months ago, and ended up killing immigrants by mistake. They were trying to kill, right? They were trying to kill the National Guard people. Now, in that rationale, does that mean anybody who criticizes the National Guard and then some crazy person tries to shoot the National Guard, are you now complicit in the National Guard's murder because you criticize? Because that is something that a lot of the people in America don't agree with. You should be able to criticize the National Guard, but at the same time, you don't want people taking shots at the National Guard. Now, Brett Stevens has, and a lot of people on that side, have a contradictory view. On the one hand, you should be allowed to criticize the National Guard, and that doesn't mean, and if some nutcase shoots at the National Guard, that's not your fault, right? You can do two things. That you can say, I don't want people killing the National Guard, but I also don't want the National Guard being in my state. You can say, I think Israel went too far, without then saying, oh, but they should be killed. Like, you should be able to do both. You should be able to go, anti-Semitism is real. Anti-Semitism is definitely increasing. There's no doubt about that. Nobody should be killing people based on whatever religion they are. That's horrific. At the same time, you should be able to say, I think Israel, the government, I feel like they went too far in Palestine. But if you, in any way, so the bar needs to be higher, right? And you can't conflate people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes, who are actually, in my opinion, real anti-Semites, or they're just grifters. I don't know. Nick Fuentes, I think, is a real anti-Semite. I think Nick Fuentes is absolutely an anti-Semite. And so, again, you can't conflate criticism of Israel, and when I say criticism, I don't mean saying what Nick Fuentes says. I'm saying some criticism of Israel, as long as it's done in a way that doesn't paint everyone. Anything that is true and right should be able to stand up. And criticism in itself does not mean violence. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You should be able to do both things at the same time. You should be able to criticize the National Guard going into places and still being against white supremacist people, and we have a felon penalty. Yeah, you should be able to. This would be like saying, this was like when people criticize Trump as being authoritarian. So we're criticizing Trump for being authoritarian. Someone takes a shot at Donald Trump, and then it's the people who criticize Trump are now complicit for someone taking a shot at him. So again, this is what drives me mad about the conversations at the moment, is where if you criticize anybody and then and like a group, right? Um, and then then something happens to that group by some crazy person, then you're now complicit in that murder, or you're complicit in the assassination of Donald Trump. The idea that we're not allowed to criticize Trump, and therefore if some crazy person that would be insane, right? Painting painting a whole group as something like, as complicity murder is horrendous. But in this particular group in Australia, there is no doubt that this group was anti-Semitic, that they did that. And it's a hard thing to do, right? Because, you know, if you do want to criticize Israel, you've got to be careful in these situations, um, because there's too many, in my opinion, there's too many real anti-Semitics around at the moment, especially online. And I'm talking about people like Nick Fuentes, and they have really big audiences, and they are, you know, they are truly anti-Semitic people, and so it's a thread that you got to kind of try to do. I don't really get it, but I guess what I'm saying is we should be open to criticizing stuff without being called anti-Semitic. We should be able to call out people like these murderers at the same time. And you can't say that Australian gun laws are not working because of a one-off event, horrific one-off event. So, in my opinion, I think the gun laws are working. That doesn't mean they're perfect. It doesn't mean they're always going to work. Nobody ever said in Australia that if you make it harder to get guns, there will never be another mass shooting. No one ever said if you make it harder for people to get guns, that there will be never another shooting, right? So they create these false arguments that were never made in the first place by Australia. And so again, from that point, yeah, I hope so, Rob. Yeah. So again, I think it's a crazy thing in Australia to be living through, because for as someone who pays attention to a lot of American politics, I'm usually here talking about an American shooting or something that happened in America with this, or the university, and now it's in my country, and I feel melancholy about. I feel a little bit embarrassed that it's my country did this. I feel a little bit, you know, I hate the people who did this, because they did this because they murdered innocent people who were just going along their lives, and I hate the idea that there are people out there thinking like this and could possibly do this again. Um, and so again, I do feel a little bit embarrassed about it, because I always thought of Australia as a country. Freedom of speech was designed so we would have the ability to criticise the government, especially as a whole point, so we could find the faults and officials and work to fix it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. You should be able to criticise the government should be able to criticize another government, like our government criticized Israel, but it was done in such a mild way. Like, people don't realize what a mild way it was done. Yeah, yeah. Like, like our government is like the most milquetoast government in the world. It's like doesn't want to offend anyone, is very sensitive about different cultures, Jewish, Muslim, everybody, right? You would not find anything our government says that's anti-Semitic at all. It's not even close. It's the opposite, right? But there are people who want to politicize this and to make it out that because there was a guy that tried to help, but he got shot too. Yeah, that's right, Donna. There was someone who tried to help. He was also, by the way, an Arab. He was an Arabic guy who tried to help. So, yeah, so there you have an Arabic guy trying to help Jewish people from being shot. Now, I believe he's going to be okay. He was shot. He was shot in the arm and thing, but I do believe he's having surgery. But from what I know, he's actually going to be okay. So yeah, so we should be able to criticize that. I'm really, really hoping that that in America, because I always saw Australia as an antidote to America's gun culture, gun violence, and I just feel like it's going to be harder to make that argument now, even though it doesn't change. It doesn't change the statistics, but you just know that there's going to be a whole bunch of people who are going to go. They're going to say things like, "Oh yeah, but what about that guy who shot 15 people dead?" Because I know how people on that side work. They're not interested in like facts or statistics or anything like that. Um, we have to be like we have to be careful that you can you can chew gum and walk at the same time. And I hope that Australia is still seen as a safe country because it is a safe country. I hope Australia is still seen as a country that Australia is where, as you described, is so much more safe than here. This is real embarrassment here now. Yeah, thanks, Paul. It is. Australia is still a very safe country. Again, this is a one-off terrorist attack that could have happened anywhere in the world and had absolutely nothing to do with the government. There's still no comparison to how much safer in the US. Exactly right. Yeah, yeah. And, the other argument was, well, if there was other people with guns, they could have, that's not how it works. Do you know what I mean? So it's not that easy. A lot of people want to try to make it out. In some of the states in America where you have open carry, they have some of the worst murder rates in the world. So having a whole bunch of people around with guns, because here's the thing, right? There would be so many more people in Australia who I'm sure young men, specifically young men, who have had thoughts like these two, like the father and son, right? And and they didn't go ahead and do it because it was so hard for them to get a gun. Now, the reason, I mean, this guy was a gun lover. He was part of a gun club. If you're just a random person in Australia, right? Most people, like the amount of people who are into guns in America to versus Australia is so different. Yeah. Like I don't know anybody who's a gun. Tyler Robertson, do we know that the Arab guy there was helping is okay? Uh, so when you say okay, I don't know. I don't believe he has life-threatening injuries, Kimmy. But he was shot in the shoulder and I think the arm. So he will. I think he had to have surgery. So I don't know. I don't know the outcomes of the surgery, but I have been told that it wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious. It was still a serious shooting. Yeah. Um, but yeah, that was amazing to watch. He took his own life. He basically risked his life to save those people, and you know he didn't have a gun himself, but he got rid of that other person's gun. And there's no doubt in the world that by taking that gun off that second shooter, that saved lives. Absolutely, that saved life. Yeah, he's a hero. 100%, he's a hero. Yeah, he's an absolute hero. Yeah, and I know it's not a big deal, but I'm glad that it was another Arab that did it. I'm glad it was an Arab because it brings the situation into this isn't just Jewish people versus non-Jewish people or whatever. It shows that someone risked their own life who wasn't part of the Jewish community. He risked his own life to help other people. And he didn't risk their own life just because they were Jewish. He risked their own life because he wanted to save other people. It wasn't about what nationality was. What I'd love to see in Australia, which I don't think we see enough around the world, is after an event like this, is I'd like to see like community leaders from the Jewish community, from the Muslim community, from the Christian community, from all different communities come out together, like with standing next to each other, right after this, and saying that this is not about our religion. Like obviously it was about religion, but the average Australian doesn't think like these madmen thinks, right? And I think that sort of thing would actually stop more copycat killers, because what usually happens in this situation, and it happens in America, but it happens in Australia as well, is that now there'll be a massive backlash against the Muslim community in general. Um, And once you have a backlash against a whole community, once you start telling a whole community that they're all terrorists, they're all this, you can't trust any of you, like, like Laura Loomer community, right? Once you start doing that, you're going to create an environment where mentally ill young men are going to do more of this, not less of this. But if all the communities come together and it's like we're all against this, what this person did, then I think that lowers the temperature and it lowers the chances of this happening more and more. But unfortunately, we do have Murdoch News in Australia. It's called Sky News. We do have Murdoch newspapers in Australia. And I have no doubt in the world that they're going to make this all Muslims are bad, all Muslims are this, all this and that, and stuff like that. And people are too scared to fight back against that because then it's like you're defending, they feel like if you fight back against this, they'll feel like they're defending what they did. Because I will say this, if you're in the Jewish community and this has happened to you or your family member or someone I, you know, I would give grace to those people if they were a little bit, you know what I mean, against the Muslim community because it's a personal thing for them, right? So, even if they weren't beforehand, and then because when something personal happens to you, religion's killing all communications because it's absolutism. It's about, yeah, exactly. So I give a free pass to the Jewish community for feeling these things because they've been affected by it the most. But other people in the news, like news media, news organizations, influencers online, right, who try to make this into like all Muslims are like these two people, they're going to make the situation way worse, right? And they're going to inflame the situation. And this is the problem that you have, in America, you've got Trump and MAGA calling everyone complicity murder for what happened to Charlie Kirk. And now you're going to have all these people, Muslim community. It's a very hard thing to do because you don't, it used to be, I mean, I remember years and years ago, after a tragedy like this, you would see people from different religious groups, leaders come out and support each other, right? And say, look, this was awful, but this doesn't represent all of us. I just want you to, the Muslim group, the Muslim leaders will come out and go, we just abhor what happened. This is awful, disgusting what happened. We don't like this, all that sort of stuff. So, again, it's that sort of thing like where I would love to see, but you don't see much of it at the moment in Australia in this sort of thing. And a lot of it, unfortunately, has to do with, in my opinion, right-wing media, because nobody on left-wing media is defending what happened. Nobody in left-wing media is defending what happened, right? But on right-wing media, they're trying to make it all about all Muslim people. So, and it's a terrible thing. And the other thing is that because it's been 30 years since the shooting, I think Australia probably has to look at the gun laws again. Now, I'm not necessarily saying they need to be more strict. Indeed, Donna, I find it odd that people keep trying to push an idea that is soaked in blood as a good idea. It causes suffering. Yeah. I mean, I myself am an atheist, but I don't expect everyone to, like, I'm not an atheist in the sense of I don't think anybody should be religious. I'm not like an ultra, atheist or whatever. I was brought up Catholic, right? But then I became an atheist through my Catholicism, right? Growing up. But it's from that sense of that point of view. So yeah, I think a lot of this religion and stuff, I just feel like it's when the absolutism in religion is always a problem, when it's absolutism, when it's the extremes element of it. When you think that a higher being, a higher power is saying it's okay for you to do something, that's always a big problem, right? Because then you don't care about the law, you don't care about dying, because you think if you die, you're going to go to heaven. I don't think people should not be able to do religion. I just agree with Hitchens. Play with your toys at home. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, yeah. And look, I've never, it's funny that, with the religion thing, because since I started doing Substack and started doing Substack videos and posting online, um, I have to say my worst experience has been anti-Semitism for me. Like, as I said, I was brought up a Catholic and now I'm an atheist. So I was never Jewish. However, I wrote a note about a month ago that kind of got a lot of views, and I was criticizing Nick Fuentes for his anti-Semitic views. And I've never had this before in a year of doing Substack. Is for the first time I was like, I had the Groypers or the Nick Fuentes fans coming after me and saying, that's because you're Jewish and you're a Jewish C word and you're Jewish this and you're Jewish that and Jewish this. And that's because, and it was like full on. Then I started getting private messages, like about what should happen to me, like actual like threats against me for the first time ever. Um, and if I didn't answer, like if I answered back to some Jewish comment about me, and I refused to answer whether I was Jewish or not, because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of me, because I felt like if I said, "Oh no, I'm not Jewish," that in a way I was playing into the whole anti-Semitism thing of they're like, "Oh, okay, then," Um, so I didn't tell them that I wasn't Jewish because I didn't want to give them that satisfaction of, because then it's like I'm trying to get myself out of something. So, but and then they would say something like, "Well, you're not answering that you're not Jewish because you are Jewish, and therefore you're this, or that." And I have to admit, it was the worst attacks than I get from MAGA. I've had bad attacks from MAGA where they go pedophile, or they go, you're a libtard, all this sort of stuff, like pretty bad stuff. But the anti-Semitism thing, even though I'm not even Jewish, was was pretty full on. Yeah, I have to say, it was pretty full on. So it definitely does exist. Um, and some of the people who who are anti-Semitic, they do have pretty strong views about it, and they pretend to be anti-Israel, but they're not. And so, yeah, so it's a tough one to go with, because my own personal experience is the worst experiences I had with people who thought I was Jewish and really came after me in a really full-on way, to the point where I had to contact Substack, and Substack basically had to get rid of those people. Um, so yeah, so that was my personal experience. Now, again, like, you know, there's a difference between being attacked for that. And again, I think a lot of the people who attacked me were probably more the Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens type people. I don't think they were the Islamic type radicals, because just the way they talked, there's a difference between how Islamic radicals talk about Jewish people and how people like Nick Fuentes talk about them. They have a lot of similarities, but they also have some differences, right? A lot of the Islamic anti-Semitism comes from Palestine, or it comes from American interventionism or whatever, as where a lot of the anti-Semitism from Nick Fuentes doesn't come, they don't really care much about Israel and all that. I was brought up Catholic too. My thinking then was mix of guilt and OCD. Once I let it go, got out of my thinking, yeah. I think I'm glad Substack got rid of them for you. Thanks, Kimmy. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Growing up Catholic can be, you had to go to confession all the time. Like I remember being like 8 years old, and I would have to go to confession twice a week. And I mean, I never did anything wrong. So I would go to confession, and there was no reason because I hadn't done anything wrong because I was 8 years old. And so, but I was forced to give confessions, and so I would just make up stuff. I would lie to the priest that I you know I'd done something bad just because I feel guilt that I need to do something bad. So yeah, I think religion has a place. I'm not against religion in itself, but I am against fundamentalism. It might work out a bit better if people were to believe things that are demonstrable and are backed up by empirical testable. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Catholic guilt. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I like people like religions like the Protestants, or I think it's the Protestants, where they're more. They're not. They're almost Protestants are almost in anyway in Australia. They're like this. They're more like almost like religion. They're almost like atheists, but they're not atheists. You know what I mean? They're very left wing. Some of the Protestants in Australia, like they're pro gay marriage. They allow women to be priests. Um, they're very pro immigrant. All that they're very progressive in Australia, and they're often hated by the right wingers. And to me, that's a nice type of religion, right? And they don't believe that God plays a part every day. They just believe that God kicked it off, right? God kicked it off, and then it's up to humans now to decide their fate. I like that better than God is, directly talking to me, or you know, um, you know, uh, a priest tells you what is right or wrong. You should have your own relationship or whatever, as long as it's within the rules of a civilized society. That's the only thing. This is a bit better. Yes, yeah, exactly. So yeah, so anyway, that was kind of my take on the whole thing. It's been quite a bit of an experience happening in Australia. I mean, probably for the United States, again, I do feel a bit. I've got to say, I feel so much pity and sadness for those people who had to experience that, because all they were doing, it's like we're heading into Christmas. They were there to celebrate Hanukkah, celebrate their thing, and then this happens to them just before Christmas. It's just such an awful thing for those people, their families, and even the people who were there witnessing it, and even going out further and further, just for Australia as a whole. I kind of understand a little bit more what it's like to be an American in some way, because a lot of times when something bad happens in America, Americans will often say, I'm embarrassed about that. I'm sorry about that. I'm American, but I don't like Trump. I'm embarrassed for my own country. Well, I can say that I'm embarrassed for my own country for what happened yesterday as well. So I certainly feel that, and I always thought there was a difference between people who voted for Trump and didn't. I always felt sympathy for many Americans. But yeah, I do feel embarrassed for my country a little bit at the moment. I feel sad for my country at the moment. I feel sad for the people mostly who had to go through this, and I feel also sad for um, the people who are criticizing our gun laws and saying it didn't work. They did work once in 30 years. That worked, and don't think that Australia is anti-Semitic. Australia is no more anti-Semitic than any other Western country at all. And there's nothing that our government could have done to stop this, as far as I know. Um, no one's come up with any alternative solutions to stop this. Um, so I don't know. I don't know what to say. But anyway, why would God hate anyone? Religion means leaving your brain at the door. My father's quote. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't like to be like, when I was younger and I decided I was an atheist, I was quite anti-religion. And then I realized that doesn't work, because a lot of people have religion as a big part of their life. And so I came to accept religion a lot more, and also accept people for what, whether they believe in God or they don't, and things like that. And so yeah, so I'm not against religion at all at the moment, and some people they don't believe in God, but they believe in some sort of spiritual thing, like Eastern, whatever it is that they believe in. I don't believe in any of that, but I think, I think I think as human beings, we like to believe there's a meaning in our life. And I don't think anyone likes to think that you die and then nothing happens. I think that's a very strange thing to think that suddenly you die and it's like it was before you lived, like before you were born. And and when you have family members who die, you like to think that those family members go somewhere nice. And then you also like to think that you get to see those people again. So it's a it also gives meaning to people for life. Like if it's everything's just random, then what's the point of everything? So from a philosophical point of view, I understand religion because it gives people structure, it gives people meaning, it gives them like a crutch to hold on to when people they know die or when they die. So I totally understand why religion is such a big thing. Um, but making a religion out of atheists exactly is irritating. Yeah, exactly. I agree, Pilot. Yeah, even our beloved pets have a password. Yeah, exactly, Paul. Paul. Yeah, exactly. Like I have a friend of mine. She's not religious at all, but when her cat died, she went and saw a a cat, someone who can go to the afterlife for her cat. So she's an atheist, right? But when her cat died, she went off and she saw someone who can talk to a cat, and the whole thing was on tape, right? And then she came back to me and I said, "Oh, how did that? How was it talking to the person who can talk to dead cats and dogs?" And she went, "Yeah." She goes, "I'm pretty sure it's true because um, the person knew that when I got home, the cat would rub up against my leg." And I'm like, I'm pretty sure most cats rub up against people's legs. Do you know what I mean? So it just goes to show that, when people find tragedy in their life, that they can sometimes become less, they can do things that, and for her, it gave her it made her feel better that she was able to think that her cat was in a good place. All right. So, I mean, I wouldn't believe if I have a dog. If my dog when my dog passes away, she's not going to pass away. She's going to live forever. But if she did pass away, I could see some. I don't think it would have worked for me because I wouldn't believe it. But I can see how religion can be, consoling for a lot of people. So there are tens of thousands of gods around the world, but you can assure the one that you chose is the right one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also, it just so happens to be that most of the time when you choose a religion, it just happens to be that your parents were that religion, But anyway, I think I'm not against religion. I still think it's a positive thing. I think being an atheist and making fun of people who are religious, I think that's a bad thing. It doesn't work. I think it pushes more people towards religion, and it pushes people against religion who are atheists as well. You don't want to be like one of those annoying, like snobbish atheists who think you know everything like that. So you know, again, everyone has different thoughts, different views. So but anyway, so I'm going to go now. I just thought I wanted to come on and talk about this today. I'll do another one in a couple of days, talk about Trump. And I was going to talk about Trump and some other things, but I thought it was important to come on here and give people a perspective of something that happened big in Australia from someone who lives in Australia, but also follows American politics. So, you could understand what's going on over here. So thank you so much thank you everyone in America and Australia around the world for, your well wishes to all the people who suffered in this, the people, the people who died and their family members and all that. Um, I'm sure they love to hear that people support overseas and stuff like that. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you. Have a great day. I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you so much. Bye bye.